Mention the name of William Shakespeare to students of English the whole world over, and you'll run an entire gauntlet of reactions, ranging from a glazed expression of complete indifference to abject misery and unmitigated terror. There are always the odd few who will be worryingly stimulated at the prospect of reading the great Bard of Avon's complete works, but for the majority, Shakespeare is consigned to the worthy list of all-time educational tortures, alongside algebra, Pythagoras, the Corn Laws, photosynthesis, physics in its entirety, and the poetry of Ezra Pound. But this is unjust indeed, because most preconceived notions concerning William Shakespeare are, to say the least, unfounded, resulting in the genius of the world's greatest ever dramatist being systematically overlooked due to ignorance and fear. When you're trying to get to grips with any literary giant, the subject has to be approached from 3 points of perspective. Firstly, you have the work of your writer, the novels, plays, or poems printed in black and white for you to read and experience for yourself. Secondly, you must set the author's work in context by discovering a little about the society in which your writer lived. This doesn't mean an in-depth history lesson, far from it. What you actually require is a snapshot of your writer's life and times. The dates and pertinent events on a national scale are helpful, but if you can get your hands on the great gossip and scandals of the day as well, particularly when the subject of your study was involved, then so much the better. To complete your picture, you must lastly take a view of your writer's life, warts and all, and try to build a picture of their character, not only from the great literary words they've put down on paper for posterity, but also from diaries, letters, and personal effects as well. However, when it comes to William Shakespeare, this fine theory is very difficult to put into practice for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Shakespeare never intended that anyone should read his plays. They were created for performance on a stage. What you see before you on the page is not what young William had in mind at all. Line by line he presented his actors with the scripts for each play, which were duly performed and then often discarded. It took until 7 years after Shakespeare's death for 2 of his actor friends to collect together the plays and publish them as the First Folio of 1623. The intention of John Hemmings and Henry Condell had been to keep the memory of so worthy a friend and fellow worker alive. Not, as you might belligerently suppose, to inflict torture on the students of the future. Therefore, from the outset, make sure that you see the works of Shakespeare performed, whether live, on TV, or in film versions. It's the only way to truly appreciate what the author actually intended. When you set Shakespeare's work in context, you quickly realise just how far back in time you're travelling. Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne of England for much of Shakespeare's life, but he survived to see the end of the Tudors and the beginning of the Stuart line, with the accession of King James I. Shakespeare's plays were popular with both monarchs and royal households, and Shakespeare really did enjoy significant celebrity status. The history of this period is pretty well documented, but sadly the same cannot be said of William Shakespeare. When you want to delve into his character, life and times, the truth of the matter leaves you with very little concrete evidence to go on. By the age of 28, Shakespeare had started to appear in London, but up until then his baptism had been recorded in 1564, his marriage in 1582, and the births of his children in 1583 and 85, all in Stratford-upon-Avon. Nothing else about him, through those early years of his life, exists, and here's a great thing to boost your confidence. Of all the thousands of biographies and commentaries that you'll find on the bookshelves about Shakespeare, whatever the expert theories postulated for the great man's formative years, nobody really knows for sure, because there isn't a shred of evidence to back anything up. Your own personal opinion about the young genius from Stratford-upon-Avon is as good as the next man's, or woman's for that matter. Every single day, somewhere in the world, somebody publishes a book about Shakespeare, so don't be intimidated about forming your own ideas about the man. Start afresh completely and try exploring a little Shakespeare without the preconceptions. You'll be truly surprised at what you'll discover. Forget the stuffy, middle-aged, respectable, balding Elizabethan Shakespeare in his trademark lace ruff, and search out young William, the wild and reckless country boy from Warwickshire who changed the world of literature for the better. Honest. In this programme, we'll take an in-depth look at 3 of Shakespeare's plays: Twelfth Night, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth. But before doing so, we'll practice what we preach and turn to Shakespeare's life and the society in which he lived to set us off in search of the man behind the legend. To begin then at the beginning, make your way to Stratford-upon-Avon, the very epicentre of the Shakespeare tourist industry. Every building in this town has an association with the great bard, or so the traders would have you believe, and it takes a modicum of detective work to fathom it all out. This is Shakespeare's birthplace, where he's supposed to have been born on St. George's Day, April the 23rd, 1564. 2 points of contention here. Firstly, nobody can say for sure that he was born in this house, although it was the Shakespeare family home of the time. And secondly, there's no evidence to corroborate the date. We know from baptism records that his birth was around this period, but things are perhaps just a little too convenient to be believable. Shakespeare certainly died on the 23rd of April 1616, as his tombstone in Holy Trinity Church, Stratford, verifies. So it was rather poetic that the many followers of Shakespeare should be spun such a good story. Soon after his death, he evolved into a national institution. And what could have been more appropriate than such a great Englishman, both entering this world and exiting it on St. George's Day, celebrated in honour of the dragon-slaying patron saint of all England. A PR guru's dream come true. Most people have a fair idea that Mary Arden had something to do with William Shakespeare, and she was in fact his mother. If you follow the tourist signs a little way out of Stratford to the picturesque village of Wilmcote, you can't miss Featherbed Lane and the 16th century half-timbered property famous the whole world over as Mary Arden's house. Before she married John Shakespeare, the great bard's father, this was always thought to have been Mary's family home, but recent discoveries suggest a bit of a mix-up. The next-door house, Glebe Farm, is actually far more likely to have been her home, but the Birthplace Trust cares for both properties, and it's well worth the effort to visit here. It's evident that whichever house belonged to Mary's family, the Ardens were people of substance, and it's well known that the lady in question married rather beneath her station when she joined forces with a Shakespeare. The Shakespeares were known as a wild bunch of reprobates, and although John was better than most of them, being a successful Stratford glovemaker, he wasn't always the civic dignitary that he later rose to be. In April 1552, he was fined a shilling for making a dung heap outside his neighbour's house here in Henley Street. Elizabethan towns were pretty revolting when it came to sewage disposal, but rules were rules, and each road had its own muck hill where residents were obliged to take their excrement, rather than leaving it to rot outside their property, or in this case, somebody else's. Interestingly, local folk always said that if a Shakespeare owed you money, it would be a difficult job to get your cash. But on this occasion, John settled his fine immediately, perhaps showing signs of an early attempt to improve his dubious reputation. John Shakespeare and Mary Arden are most likely to have married here at the parish church of St. John the Baptist in Aston Cantlow, but there's no evidence of their nuptials in 1557, because parish records did not come into being until a few years after this date. William was the third child born to John and Mary, but the two little girls who preceded him both died in infancy. Depending upon your point of view, of course, it's indeed fortunate that baby William survived, because bubonic plague raged through Stratford when he was just 3 months old. But it's likely that his mother whisked him away to the safety of her family home at Wilmcote until the worst of the danger had passed. By the time William was of school age, his father had risen both socially and in business, and was well on the way to becoming Mayor of Stratford. As an upwardly mobile gentleman of the town, he sent his son, perhaps as young as 5 years of age, to the King's New School, also known as Stratford Grammar, and as we discover in Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man speech from As You Like It, perhaps young William did not relish the privilege very much at all. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like a snail unwillingly to school. Typically, a Tudor school day ran from 6 in the morning until 6 at night, with lessons on nothing but religion and the classics. Masters were tyrannical, beating the boys for the slightest misdemeanour, and no doubt William was none too upset when his father's business went into a decline, because it meant he was withdrawn from school at the age of 13. Again, we're into the realms of guesswork here, no matter how well informed, because there's no record of William Shakespeare either entering or leaving Stratford Grammar School. As we'll discover later, Shakespeare's reputation as an uneducated ploughboy was to follow him to London, but it's likely that he at least received the rudiments of schooling, however reluctantly, while a Stratford lad. What happened to young Will Shakespeare next really takes the biographer into the world of fantasy, because basically your guess is as good as anyone's. Perhaps, most logically, he worked with his father making gloves in Henley Street, but maybe he didn't remain in Stratford at all. Some say that he ran away to sea and travelled around the world with Sir Francis Drake on the Golden Hind. With other suggestions abounding, some of which were as fanciful as the plots of Shakespeare's future plays. But whatever the fantastical notions of William's youth, the reality that he faced as an 18-year-old Stratford lad about town brought him crashing down to earth with an almighty bump. If you read the tourist's guidebooks, you'll be taken on a lover's journey to Shottery and the picturesque thatched cottage of Anne Hathaway, where William in his prime allegedly went a-courting. Further from the truth, however, you could not get. Probably as a result of a single roll in the hay, Anne Hathaway claimed to have been impregnated by William Shakespeare, a trap that many a good-looking lad has fallen into, before and since. Will was 8 years Anne's junior, and it would seem that ensnarement into marriage had been the none too eligible wench's intent. Anne's supporters ensured that Will had no choice in the matter, and by May 1583, Will found himself married with a daughter, Susanna, at the ripe old age of 19. Shakespeare was not a happy young man, and financial constraints forced his new family to move into the already crowded Henley Street house, where Will's younger siblings ranged in age from Edmund at just 2, Richard 8 and Joan 13, right through to Gilbert at 16. It's no secret that Anne no longer appealed to Shakespeare's sexual tastes in any way, shape or form, but nevertheless he did dutifully manage to father a set of twins, Hamnet and Judith, in 1585, adding to his onerous responsibilities. The future looked grim for William Shakespeare, with no escape from domesticity in sight. Occasional poaching forays into nearby Charlecote Park after Sir Thomas Lacey's deer proved about as exciting as life could get. But when Shakespeare was caught in the act and hauled before the duty magistrate, it was none other than Sir Thomas himself. It would seem that Will was rather a mouthy character who irritated the wronged landowner beyond all measure, even writing an insulting lewd ballad about Lacey, which Shakespeare posted on the Charlecote Park gates for all to see. From thenceforward, the aggrieved Sir Thomas pursued Will at every possible opportunity, denying the young rogue even the pleasures of a night out poaching once in a while. Escape was not an option, but escapism was served up quite regularly at Stratford's Guildhall, when visiting theatre companies would ply their trade, and Shakespeare may well have had the opportunity to watch them in action. Now, remembering that Shakespeare is not heard of again between the baptism of the twins in 1585 and his appearance in London in 1592, we need to attempt to fill in a few of the details with a little colourful speculation. Could it be that Shakespeare found employment with a troupe of visiting actors who took him on to London and escape from Sir Thomas Lacey and the wife and kids back at Henley Street? In 1587, we know that the Queen's men arrived to perform in Stratford a man short due to a drunken brawl near Oxford, where one of their number had been stabbed to death. It's guesswork, but it would have been quite feasible for William Shakespeare to have stepped into the dead man's shoes, touring his way to London, and in the absence of any firmer evidence, neatly explains Shakespeare's total disappearance from the historical record books. Shakespeare's re-emergence as a London playwright in 1592 was documented by a fellow wordsmith who was far from complimentary. In his groat's worth of wit bought with 1,000,000 of repentance, university-educated Richard Green describes Shakespeare as an upstart crow, who supposes he is as well able to bombast out blank verse as the next man. To this day, there are still those who refuse to believe that an uneducated Warwickshire lad was responsible for writing the world's greatest dramatic literature, and it was very much the case in Shakespeare's own lifetime. It's incredibly hard to date Shakespeare's plays, but by 1594 at least 6 of them had been produced, when he actually bought shares in the London Chamberlain's Men. Shakespeare remained with this theatre company throughout his career, which underwent a name change to the King's Men when Elizabeth I died and King James succeeded her. The young country boy making his way in the big city was prolific in his writing, but it certainly wasn't a case of all work and no play. If sexual frustration, saddled with a wife he couldn't stand the sight of, was part of Stratford life, he undoubtedly made the most of what was on offer in the nation's capital. In many of Shakespeare's sonnets, you'll find a dark-eyed beauty who stole Shakespeare's heart, and despite the best efforts of literature students throughout the ages, her identity has never been revealed. There have also been suggestions that Shakespeare was bisexual, and on more than one occasion the doctors of the day were called upon to treat him for a particularly nasty dose of the clap. A great story turns up in a diary of a barrister who knew Shakespeare and his friend, the actor Richard Burbage. An adoring Elizabethan fan was so taken with Burbage's performance as Richard III that she arranged for him to come to her that night, but as Richard III. Scallywag Shakespeare, overhearing the arrangements being made, turned up at the amorous lady's house some time earlier than he knew had been arranged. He was duly admitted, and whilst enjoying the pleasures of celebrity, a message was brought that Richard III was at the door. Without even stopping for breath, Shakespeare replied by sending word that William the Conqueror was quite obviously before Richard III, demonstrating his wide-ranging knowledge of history, not to mention his witty interpretation of it. How much Mrs. Shakespeare ever knew back in Stratford of her husband's carrying on, we'll never know. But the money he sent home began to increase, so maybe there were not too many questions asked.
Te lucis ante terminum, rerum creator pascimus.
Shakespeare did return to Stratford in 1596, but for the most tragic of reasons, as his son Hamnet died. What caused the 11-year-old's demise is not known, but it was to be the end of the male Shakespeare line, and was most distressing for the much-absent father. If word of Shakespeare's success in London had not reached the good folk of Stratford, then a year after Hamlet's death, he made sure that everyone who had ever looked down their noses at him knew just how important he'd become. Shakespeare bought New Place, the biggest and grandest house in Stratford, but sadly no longer on the tourist trail. The Birthplace Trust owns Nash's house, a superb black and white Tudor property that Shakespeare's granddaughter lived in with her husband, the lawyer Tom Nash. But if you enter the gardens, you'll actually be standing on the site of New Place. The untimely demolition of New Place would have probably rather amused William Shakespeare, and the story wouldn't be out of place in one of his more fantastical plays. Long after Shakespeare's death, an eccentric 18th century vicar bought New Place, which was well known as the Bard's Stratford home. Just like today, pilgrims would come from far and wide to see Shakespeare's house. But the reverend gentleman found this most annoying. People would aggravate him still further by asking to see the mulberry tree in the garden, planted, allegedly, by Shakespeare himself, so the vicar soon put a stop to that by chopping it down. When, later, local tax officials decided to try and put up the rates bill on New Place, they were dealt with equally short shrift. The reverend gentleman vowed that no civic official would ever cross his threshold to assess the property, and he meant it, completely demolishing New Place to prevent them from doing so. With one obstinate act of vandalism, this most significant part of the nation's Shakespearean heritage was destroyed. However, in his lifetime, Shakespeare wasn't adverse to a bit of property demolition of his own, which is how his world-famous Globe Theatre came into being. With Shakespeare's popular plays to perform, the Lord Chamberlain's men had become very financially successful, and their landlord decided that he too should get a piece of the action. When the theatre's lease expired, he demanded a huge rent increase, which Shakespeare and his associates took a very dim view of. Over a period of years, the arguments got steadily more and more heated, until the exasperated landlord threatened to pull the theatre down. As was quite common at the time, literally only the land belonged to the landlord, and he had every right to do this. But rather than making the actors cough up the extra cash, instead he gave them an ingenious idea. The theatre belonged to the Lord Chamberlain's men in terms of building materials. So at the dead of night, they dismantled the theatre, plank by plank, and transported it across the River Thames. This modern replica of the Globe stands almost on the exact spot of Shakespeare's 16th century reconstruction, which unfortunately burnt down during a performance in 1613. The great wooden O, as Shakespeare was fond of describing his theatre, was open to the elements, with no roof and few other comforts, so consequently the audience positively demanded entertainment. There was nothing refined about Elizabethan or Jacobean theatre, and if the audience was displeased, the actors would be bombarded with all kinds of disgusting missiles, and Shakespeare quickly became very skilled at adding comic, bawdy scenes after heavy dramatic moments, just to keep the more earthy natured of the playgoers happy. Success followed success. But by the time Shakespeare reached his 50th birthday, almost a year after the Globe fire, with his health failing, he retired to Stratford. Fortunately for him, his elder daughter had married the town's most eminent physician, and today you can still visit Hall's Croft, the couple's delightful half-timbered home. The good Dr. Hall offered his father-in-law sound advice when he told him to cut back on the drinking and late nights, but to no avail. William Shakespeare had always enjoyed life to the full, and he had no intention of changing his bad habits for anyone. Shakespeare's final curtain fell quite suddenly in the end, after much partying at his younger daughter's wedding. All his London cronies were present, and by all accounts voracious consumption of too much Rhenish wine and pickled herrings resulted in his taking ill the very next day. It was more than a hangover. Shakespeare failed to get better despite John Hall's best efforts, and he died, according to legend, on his 52nd birthday, St. George's Day, 1616. The mortal remains of William Shakespeare were buried in Stratford's Holy Trinity Church, where the great bard's own choice of words defies anybody to ever disturb him. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. Perhaps his scene with the raucous gravediggers in Hamlet was based upon personal experience, and the thought of his own skull being tossed around to cries of "Alas, poor Shakespeare!" could well have motivated his poignant epitaph. Hopefully by this stage in the proceedings, you'll have a rather different impression of Shakespeare than the one you might well have started out with. Sadly, seeing him as a lovable rogue rather than a rather stuffy literary giant won't make studying Shakespeare any easier when you first begin. But as you progress, the fact that you're dealing with a down-to-earth, living, breathing man rather than an untouchable icon certainly helps. Shakespeare wasn't always brilliant, particularly when he had a deadline for a performance to meet, and it's quite okay to be critical as long as you back up your argument. When you're faced with the long list of Shakespeare's plays, it's hard to know exactly where to start. If anything, it's easier to work out what to avoid. Anyone who suggests that a trip to see Coriolanus might be a good introduction to the works of William Shakespeare is probably best dissuaded from such a course of action. And for our purposes in this programme, we'll go for something a little less alarming. Most people have heard of Twelfth Night, but as the title has no literal relevance to the play whatsoever, unless you've actually seen or read it, you won't have any idea what it's all about. Henry IV, Richard II, and even Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet give you a hint that the story is going to be about specific people, and obviously, where historical content is involved, what the subject matter might be as well. So where did Shakespeare get Twelfth Night from? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. The last day of the Christmas celebrations is Twelfth Night, January the 6th, which today we hardly notice, as it's only remembered as the day we take the decorations down. However, in Shakespeare's time, Twelfth Night was, if anything, a bigger celebration than Christmas itself. Twelfth Night parties were great occasions, and it's probable that this play was first performed on the 6th of January 1602, hence giving a title to Shakespeare's hitherto unnamed literary offering. As you can imagine, a play suitable for a festive party had to be as jolly and light-hearted as possible, and Twelfth Night is certainly that. and to this day it's a play often selected for festivals and celebrations. However, the setting of Twelfth Night could not be further removed from an Elizabethan Christmas time in the depths of an English winter. Looking at the Globe Theatre, considering when this play was actually first performed, it's evident that complex scenery and special effects were not at the theatre company's disposal, and it took clever writing on Shakespeare's part to bring his dramas to life. You might wonder how this might have been possible with a largely uneducated audience. But for the Elizabethans, storytelling was a popular and very accessible part of the culture, and the people who came to see early productions of Twelfth Night would have been far better able to use their imaginations than their modern counterparts would. Consequently, when Shakespeare tells us that the scene is set in Illyria, near a sea coast, for the audience it's immediately as far away from the real world as you could possibly get, allowing them to give full rein to their imaginations. What's more, Shakespeare was also paving the way for some fantastic storylines to unfold, permitting the incredible to become believable in a mysterious land, where the constraints of reality could be dismissed for the duration of the play. In its most basic form, the plot of Twelfth Night is as follows. Orsino, Duke of Illyria, begins with the "If music be the food of love, play on" speech, totally infatuated with the beautiful Olivia, who is playing just a tad hard to get, vowing to mourn the death of her brother for 7 years. Meanwhile, a shipwreck off the coast of Illyria separates boy and girl twins Viola and Sebastian. The plot follows Viola, who, thinking her brother is dead, dresses as a boy for safety's sake and goes to work as a servant to Duke Orsino. Back at Olivia's house, the fair lady's uncle, Sir Toby Belch, is scheming to have her marry his drinking companion, the wealthy but dim-witted Sir Andrew Aguecheek. But Olivia has other ideas. Viola, dressed as a boy called Cesario, falls in love with Orsino, but as the Duke's not that way inclined, stands no chance whatsoever, particularly as he's in love with Olivia anyway. Orsino sends Cesario with messages of love to Olivia, and yes, you've guessed it, Olivia falls in love with Cesario. She sends Cesario back to Orsino, rejecting the Duke's advances, but has her steward, the deliciously pompous, self-opinionated Malvolio, go after him with a ring that she claims he's left behind. Time then to meet Viola's twin brother Sebastian, who is not in the least bit dead, having been rescued by a sea captain called Antonio. The story is further spiced up as Antonio has had earlier dealings with Orsino, and the two men are sworn enemies. Nevertheless, when Sebastian heads off for Duke Orsino's court in the hope of news about Viola, Antonio follows him. If the mood is getting a little ominous here, a touch of comedy soon gets everything back on a festive track. Malvolio returns to find Sir Toby and his cronies having a noisy drinking session, and pompously calls an abrupt halt to the jolly proceedings. Maria, Olivia's feisty serving maid, is so mad at Malvolio and his party pooping that she hatches a plot to get her own back. Knowing how vain Malvolio is, she forges a love letter to him in Olivia's handwriting. Malvolio falls for it hook, line and sinker, believing Olivia to be in love with him, and follows Maria's mischievous instructions, which direct him to wear yellow stockings with cross garters while smiling endlessly in his mistress's presence. Chaos abounds. Olivia declares her love for Cesario, and needless to say, Viola rejects her amorous advances. Sir Andrew spots the two together, gets completely the wrong end of the stick, and challenges Cesario to a duel. Malvolio turns up cross-gartered in yellow stockings, grinning like a Cheshire cat, and instead of inflaming Olivia's passions, the object of his desire thinks he's gone completely mad, and instructs Sir Toby and Maria to lock him up in a darkened room. More confusion follows, as Cesario and Sir Andrew are brought together to fight, just as Antonio enters, and thinking that Cesario is his friend Sebastian, he leaps into the fray, and gets arrested by Orsino's men, who recognise him as their master's enemy. However, when Viola hears Sebastian's name, she begins to hope that her brother is still alive. Sebastian himself then turns up and is mistaken for Cesario by Sir Andrew, who attacks him. And having no idea what's been going on, Sebastian retaliates by giving Sir Andrew a thorough trouncing. Olivia arrives, also mistakes Sebastian for Cesario, and seductively ushers him into her house, later calling in a priest to secretly marry them. Everything does eventually get sorted out. Brother and sister are reunited. Olivia already has her man, and once Viola reveals her identity and declares her love for Orsino, he agrees to marry her. Orsino also realises that Antonio is a good chap after all, and releases him from prison. Sir Toby Belch marries Maria, and Malvolio is finally called for as the truth of the cross-gartered, inane grinning joke is revealed. As you might guess, Malvolio fails to see the funny side of the deception and storms off, threatening a menacing revenge upon them all.
As you all know, Twelfth Night is not a play that takes itself super seriously, and if the audience take it seriously, it doesn't work. It's meant to be funny, and it's not really meant to be believable, because we all know that in practice, a girl passing herself off as a boy for 3 months would be tough enough, but if a male version of her then turned up, we would expect people to notice, really. And you've all seen this on the stage, and nobody's really fooled by the twins, although they should be superficially alike enough that you can just suspend disbelief for long enough. But we know that the play's larger than life, it's got elements of pantomime, and what we're looking at today are scenes that really focus on that idea of almost a cartoon dimension, something that's exaggerated. So we're going to start off by looking at the scene where Malvolio finds a letter that he thinks is from Olivia, and he imagines that Olivia's in love with him. So the main characters in this scene are Malvolio himself, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew, and their friend Fabian. Maria appears briefly at the beginning and the end. There is also the box tree. I will come back to the box tree. Right? So let's think about these characters a moment. You know them very well. What's Malvolio like? As a character, what's he like? Somebody be brave and tell me. Luke?
A bit boring.
He's rather boring. Henry?
He thinks highly of himself.
He's very full of himself. Yep. He thinks he's better than everyone else.
He doesn't like other people having fun.
He doesn't like other people having fun. Yep.
He's a snob.
He's a snob. Okay, so when you think about how this character is going to move, even just think about how he's going to stand. What should he be able to demonstrate through body language, Rob?
Be like very upright.
Right, he needs to stand tall and he needs to sort of look down his nose. Right? The beginning of this scene, Maria describes him practicing behaviour to his own shadow. He hasn't got a mirror, so he's looking at his shadow, and he's practicing behaviour, so he's doing things like a flourish and a bow, or perhaps extending his hand for somebody to kiss it, or waving to an admiring multitude. Right? He's showing what he's like through the way he's moving at the beginning of the scene. Okay, you're all going to have a try at that in a moment. You're going to have a try at doing the Malvolio walk. All right, you're going to walk across the sports hall showing how you think Malvolio would move when he's practicing behaviour to himself. So nice and slow, that's beautiful, Alex, thank you, yes. Look down your nose, very haughty. That's great, Richard. I should put your hand up, somebody to kiss it, you know. That's it, lovely. Nice expression, James, very good. Okay, you can sit down. B team. Right, B stands for better, because you've had a bit more time to think about this, so I want to see you do it better than the A team did. All right? Very full of yourselves, lift your rib cage, look down your nose, suitably haughty expression, nice and slowly. Walk across to your fan club over here, and wave, off you go, move, that's it. That's very nice, Luke, yes. Daniel, excellent.
Even though these young gentlemen are not required to wear girls' dresses, as those playing females would have had to in Shakespeare's day, it still takes a degree of courage to enter into the spirit of the occasion, especially in front of the cameras, and the students of Sir Thomas Rich's school have certainly done us proud. Now, although the plot is pretty complex, there are few hidden depths to the characters. In fact, they could easily have come straight from a pantomime. Handsome, love-lorn Orsino, feisty, independent Viola, drunken Sir Toby, beautiful Olivia, saucy Maria, and idiotic Malvolio all play their parts, and what you see is exactly what you get. You can delve deeper, and there are odd touches of irony scattered along the way, but basically, Twelfth Night is about love and mistaken identity. Great fun, no more, no less, and a perfect start to studying Shakespeare.
But you have some idea of the movement because you just thought about it. All right. Okay, John, be a tree. Wonderful. You may move slightly in the breeze if your arms are all right. Goes to Toby.
Our next choice of play couldn't be more different, and although the plot is certainly more straightforward, there's a great deal of depth to the characterisation, and the themes explored include first love, family feuding, passion, death and fate, leading ultimately to a tragedy. We are, of course, talking about perhaps Shakespeare's most famous play of all, Romeo and Juliet. Before the drama even begins, the audience is treated to a prologue, which in its simplest form explains the action that's about to take place.
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, as a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventures piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. the which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So from the very outset, we know that this isn't a happy ever after sort of a story. Our two star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet, are doomed, and we're perfectly aware of it before the first act has even begun. However, for students of Shakespeare, it's not so much what the great bard is saying here that's as interesting as the way in which he's actually saying it. If you count the number of lines, 14 in all, you'll realise that this prologue is a specific type of poem known as a sonnet. There's a very particular rhythm known as iambic pentameter and a formal rhyming pattern. An Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnet, as they are often described, of which this is a classic example, rhyme AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. The last lines are described as a rhyming couplet, and as you experience more of Shakespeare's word skills, you'll pretty soon realise that he was indeed the master of this arresting, punctuating device. Often, when he wanted to draw the audience's attention to a particular phrase, or end decisively a dramatic piece of action, Shakespeare would revert to rhyming couplets, and it's well worth mentally taking note of what's being said whenever you come across them. Romeo and Juliet ends with an absolute classic rhyming couplet, and it's the perfect example to use in your essays, as it really does let the audience know that the play is at an end, plus the added bonus that it's very easy to remember, sounding possibly even a little corny to our modern day ears. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo.
O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or thou wilt not, be but swore my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet.
Shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this?
'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet, so Romeo would. Were he not Romeo called? Retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo doth thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I take thee at thy word.
High time then for a brief synopsis of Romeo and Juliet. Let's also see if we can give it some 21st century visuals. We already know that there are two feuding families from the prologue, the Montagues and the Capulets. The first action is a street fight between servants of the two houses, which gets out of control when members of the families join in as well. All is halted when the Prince of Verona, ruler of the district, arrives on the scene and promptly decrees that any further fighting between the Montagues and the Capulets will be punishable by death. That evening, the Capulets are having a party, and we discover that Romeo, the handsome young son of Lord Montague, is planning to gate crash the event with his kinsman Benvolio and his great friend Mercutio. Romeo's aim is to meet the fair Rosaline, a Capulet lady who he fancies himself in love with. This is only a possibility because it's a masked party with everyone in disguise, but as soon as Romeo sets eyes upon Juliet, the daughter of Lord Capulet, all thoughts of Rosaline evaporate, and star-crossed indeed, the unknowing children of Montague and Capulet fall in love. Even when they later discover each other's true identities, there's no going back, and the young couple are secretly married the very next day. At this point, you could be forgiven for daring to hope that the prologue has got it wrong, and that maybe true love would somehow manage to conquer all, but Shakespeare had other plans. Now, to think that nobody else at the party would have recognised Romeo is rather simplistic, and Juliet's cousin, a bit of a firebrand by the name of Tybalt, not only spotted Romeo amongst the revellers, but also vowed to avenge the insult at the first possible opportunity. Therefore, when Tybalt encounters Romeo's friend Mercutio, who is, it has to be said, also spoiling for a fight, the atmosphere becomes highly charged. As Romeo arrives, hot foot from his secret marriage to Juliet, Tybalt does everything in his power to provoke him into fighting. Understandably, Romeo has other things on his mind, and the last thing he wants to do is harm Juliet's cousin, so he backs away from trouble. Mercutio, all adrenalined up, is furious, and interpreting Romeo's actions as cowardly, draws his own sword on Tybalt. Romeo jumps between them to stop the affray, but Tybalt seizes the advantage and stabs Mercutio fatally while he's momentarily off his guard. "A plague are both your houses!" cries the dying man, and with his honour besmirched, Romeo then avenges the death of his friend by killing Tybalt. Timely as ever, the prince then arrives to mete out justice, and Romeo is fortunate to be banished rather than sentenced to death, but only because Tybalt had killed Mercutio. Nevertheless, a matter of hours after their marriage, Romeo and Juliet are destined to be separated. Friar Lawrence, the priest who performed the ceremony, offers what comfort he can and urges Romeo to head for neighbouring Mantua so that the heat can die down sufficiently for the feuding families to be told of the secret wedding. Romeo and Juliet spend a single passionate honeymoon night together, but as Romeo flees to Mantua, Juliet is grief-stricken, and her well-meaning parents make matters a whole lot worse. They assume that her sadness is due to her cousin Tybalt's death, and to cheer her up, they insist that she immediately marries Count Paris, a pleasant enough young man who has already asked Lord Capulet for Juliet's hand in marriage. The poor girl can only refuse, but her parents just won't take no for an answer. So in desperation, Juliet turns to Friar Lawrence for guidance. He advises her to do her parents' bidding, but gives her a clever potion to take the night before the wedding that will make her appear to have died in her sleep. Then, when she's been laid to rest in the family vault, the friar and Romeo can come and rescue her as the potion wears off. Again, the audience's hopes of a happy outcome rise, only to be dashed by Shakespeare's tragic plot.
Kyrie.
The letter the friar writes to explain all to Romeo goes missing, and the news of Juliet's death is the only information to reach him. Heartbroken and suicidal, Romeo persuades an apothecary to sell him poison and rushes back to the Capulet vault to take his life at his beloved's side. By this stage, nothing is straightforward, and a grieving Count Paris is already there. Believing that Juliet died because of grief for Tybalt, Paris holds Romeo responsible for the loss of his bride and prevents him from entering the vault. They fight. Romeo kills Paris, and without further ado, Romeo finds Juliet's dead body, swallows his poison, and dies just as Friar Lawrence arrives and Juliet awakens. The priest finds the bodies of Paris and Romeo, tries to whisk Juliet quickly away, but when a noise distracts him, the horrified girl stabs herself rather than face living without Romeo. By this time, the Capulets, Lord Montague and the Prince have arrived, as Paris's servant raised the alarm. The tragic scene before them makes no sense at all, and it falls to Friar Lawrence to explain what's been going on. Mortified, the two families realise that it is their feuding that's resulted in such a terrible loss of precious life, and they become reconciled in their grief. So there you have it, a classic love story. Boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love, boy and girl are parted, boy and girl are reunited. Sadly, there's no happy ending, as the reunion is only achieved through death, but it's equally as manipulated as any more cheerful love story. The characters are contrived to play specific roles, and if you're studying Shakespeare for an exam, you may well be asked to consider their various personalities and functions, and it can be helpful to create your own thumbnail sketch of each one with key memory pointers. For example, when you take a close look at Romeo, you can sum him up as impetuous and impractical, but above all else, passionate. Had he been just a little less hasty, all might have been well. He could have walked away from the fight with Tybalt, avoiding being banished, and just a few extra minutes at Juliet's graveside, or better still, a logical visit to Friar Lawrence to find out how his true love had died, and the cunning plan could have worked. Yet, without Romeo's impetuousness, there would have been no story to tell. And his passionate character is what audiences love about him, even though it is the cause of his own downfall. Make sure you can similarly describe in your own words Juliet, Friar Lawrence, Mercutio, the nurse, Benvolio, Tybalt and Paris. Then you'll be able to tackle any question that involves Shakespeare's use of characterization in Romeo and Juliet. Back up your thoughts with quotations from the play, and if you feel that a character, say for instance Friar Lawrence, is there purely to facilitate the plot and fails to stand up to scrutiny, then it's okay to say so. Try this one. Would a priest really put Juliet's parents through the anguish of believing their daughter to be dead if he was truly a man of God? Time ticks ever onwards, and we must now move on to Macbeth, or the Scottish play, if you're an actor of a nervous disposition. For the reluctant Shakespeare student, Macbeth is a great favourite, because it's one of the shortest of the great bard's plays, with a good, straightforward plot, plenty of blood and gore, and only a few main characters. All evidence suggests it was first performed in 1606, very probably in front of King James I. Interestingly, the historical content of the play includes Scottish ancestors of the king, with the wise and wily Shakespeare undoubtedly modifying the truth to flatter the royal ego. So what's Macbeth all about then? This is one of Shakespeare's most dramatic openings to any play, with 3 exceedingly old and ugly witches chanting around their cauldron in a thunderstorm, planning to later ambush Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, who the audience has yet to encounter. Duncan, King of Scotland, is having a tough time with invading Vikings, and a few of his own rebellious nobles into the bargain. Macbeth proves himself a fine and loyal warrior, and Duncan decides to reward him with the additional title of Thane of Cawdor. However, before Macbeth hears of this, he and Banquo, another noble loyal to the king, encounter the witches on their way home from doing battle. The witches predict that Macbeth will first become Thane of Cawdor and then king, and that Banquo's children will also become kings. When Macbeth learns he's already Thane of Cawdor, he takes the witches' predictions very seriously, and when his wife, Lady Macbeth, gets to hear about the supernatural goings-on, she encourages her husband to give fate a helping hand by murdering the king, just to speed things along. When Duncan then conveniently arrives to spend the night at Macbeth's castle, he's murdered by Macbeth. But Lady Macbeth has to complete the crime, smearing Duncan's servants with blood and planting the used daggers on them, so that it'll look as if they committed the dirty deed. To avoid any questions being asked, Macbeth murders the servants, supposedly in a fit of judicious outrage, and Duncan's sons, Donalbain and Malcolm, flee for their lives as Macbeth is crowned king. Paranoia starts to set in, and Macbeth, remembering the witch's predictions, attempts to have Banquo and his son Fleance murdered. Banquo is killed, but Fleance escapes, and at the same banquet where Macbeth hears the news, Banquo's ghost appears and scares the life out of him. In desperation, Macbeth seeks out the witches again and receives some very confusing predictions. They tell him that he cannot be harmed by a man born of woman, and that he will be safe until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. Macbeth is also warned against Macduff, who's gone to England to raise an army against Macbeth, and consequently Macbeth has every member of the absent Macduff's family murdered. Needless to say, Macduff takes a pretty dim view of this and joins forces with Malcolm, the son of the murdered Duncan, and they head back to Scotland to confront Macbeth. Meanwhile, Lady Macbeth has been going madder by the day, and Macbeth becomes steadily more isolated. Showdown time, and Macbeth is at Dunsinane Castle when he hears of Lady Macbeth's suicide as Malcolm and Macduff's armies attack him. But Malcolm disguises his men with tree branches from Birnam Wood, and they march on Dunsinane, fulfilling the witch's prophecy against Macbeth. Still confident, even when he faces the wronged Macduff in person, Macbeth cries out that no man born of woman can harm him. Macduff retorts that he came into the world by caesarean section, so Macbeth better be prepared to meet his maker. Macduff kills him, and in front of Macbeth's severed head, Malcolm is crowned the rightful King of Scotland. Now, just as you did with Romeo and Juliet, it's important to have an understanding of each character. Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Banquo, the witches, Macduff, Duncan and Malcolm, but there are considerable differences to consider. In Macbeth, the characters develop on a psychological level, and themes such as power, corruption, good and evil all ebb and flow with their altering personalities. This does demand a little more in-depth thinking, and there are lots of different ways to try and gain a good understanding of this remarkable drama. Whatever your views on studying Shakespeare in a school classroom, take a look at what these GCSE students are up to.
Okay, everybody, this is it. This is D-Day. We've been preparing the scripts, okay? You should have them with you. If you haven't got them in front of you, you need them now. Yeah, Act 2, Scene 2. Good. You have got this lesson to film your script, okay? And we're doing this for 2 reasons. Firstly, I want to make sure you completely understand this scene, okay? Because you've got to write your GCSE coursework on this scene. And secondly, it's also practicing your media skills. So for example, do you know when a low angle shot would be really well used or a high angle shot? Okay? What's going to happen is I'm going to team you up with another group. Okay, so
over a number of weeks, this group have been preparing to tackle a specific coursework question that is typical of the kind of things that crop up on an English exam paper. How does Shakespeare create a sense of foreboding in Act 2, Scene 2? This is where Lady Macbeth, having drugged Duncan's servants, is waiting for Macbeth to return after murdering the king. She's taken a drink herself for courage, but when Macbeth enters somewhat hysterical and covered in blood, carrying the daggers that he should have planted on Duncan's servants, she needs to take control of the situation. In previous lessons, the students have prepared a storyboard of the scene, and today they're going to work in groups to act out and film their own unique interpretations.
I was hoping Brett and Luke's group, if you work on this side of the room. Yes, and perhaps film against, use that black blind as your black backdrop. Okay, and then Griffin and Grimesy's group if you work over here. Okay, 15 minutes. Decide who's going first. Yeah, you need to come and advise him from over here, Lewis, if you're not in it. Yeah, and you need to be either side of Brett, really. Yeah? All right, help him with it.
To the right. Alright. You know blood? Alright. Go.
Action. It was the arm. I killed their fossils.
Who is there? Who there? Aren't they?
Cut. Great, that's a brilliant start. Brilliant start. I like the way you jump in on her and like surprise her. And that was brilliant when you twirled your head round like that. Oh, what was that? What was that? That was really good. Okay. So what's your next shot next then? That's good, you two. I'm impressed you've learnt your lines. Okay, Brett, you might want to get a little bit closer to him. Yes, sorry.
I can do the Scottish.
No, don't do it in Scottish.
It sounds kind of funny.
Yeah, no, just worry about the lines and how you're going to shoot them. Okay? So you're starting again? Or?
Start and she walked forward. Should we start again?
Ha! You can't do this.
And then I suddenly turn around and say, "Ha!" with the other.
Yeah, good.
And then what I think?
Who's Macbeth? Excellent.
I'm a director.
Well, help them then. Direct.
Am I looking down?
Guys, come on, we need to stay on task here.
You got to wait, man.
But yes, sir.
I have done it. Just say I have done it.
Listen, Brett, your group doesn't have too much time left, does it?
We've done two. We've done two now. We've got to do 4, haven't we?
Yeah, you do really. We need to get a move on so the other group can use the camera.
Brett,
okay?
did that one work? Yeah, it's alright. It's in, but it's just
What level one?
I've got half close.
You've shot everything so far eye level, haven't you?
Huh?
But if you think about your storyboard, you know you've shot everything on the same level, so you might want to experiment
we need to get the foot
with a high angle.
Yeah, I know.
Stand on the chair. Do that when you get it. The next one. Hang on. Yeah. Come on, man. Come on.
Got it.
Not yet. Yeah, let's stand at this end. Look down on you.
Stand in the chair and look down on my hand. Anything down onto my hand. Ready? This is a sorry sight.
Which shot are you on now then?
We're doing the first one last time now.
Right, okay. So over the shoulder, that's nice.
3, 2,
The surfeited grooms do lock their children snores. I have dread their pockets.
That's nice. I like that your decision to like film her from the back, like we're following her, to make the audience feel uneasy, because that's reflecting what? What does she feel at the moment? Well, yeah, certainly. That's making her feel brave. But more importantly, in this scene, how does she feel? Where are we go? You know, what are we trying to convey to the audience here? Well, no, but remember, she does have that conscience, doesn't she? Doesn't she? How do we know she's got a conscience? She says, that's right. If it was her dad, right. So we need to show people she does have a conscience.
She said it looked like her dad.
If he hadn't looked like my dad, yeah, I wouldn't have done it. But we're trying to make the audience feel uneasy, aren't we? That's the whole plan. So filming like that was a really clever move.
Progress is being made in the classroom, but what's going on in the corridor?
When you put it on, make sure you count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay?
Yeah, by that time, yeah.
Are you ready? You've got it on?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
This is a sorry sign.
The foolish thoughts, they are sorry sign.
Is that it?
That's it.
Close-up, squished angle.
Yeah, real extreme close-up.
Closer.
That's the Macbeth.
That's not actually you.
No, then it's Macbeth.
Okay.
Hello, carrying person.
We're on the second group here now, so a close up on their hands or something, yeah? Good.
Foolish thought. They shouldn't be from the top if he's feeling vulnerable.
I don't know.
He's doing it from the bottom, making it powerful.
Aren't you deliberately shooting them from underneath though, to like show like that their hands are like really like dominant and affecting what he's feeling? Right. Okay. Have you guys nearly finished? Have you swapped over? Yeah. Have you all shot some? Right. 2 more minutes, then you need to come back in. I'll see you at the end of the lesson. Okay. Well, you got. All right. You got about 4 more minutes then. 4 more minutes, then we need to see what you've done. Okay. Guys, you must make sure you try not to disturb other classrooms, okay? It's very important. Okay, okay. Charlotte, shirt, come on, standards.
When time is up, the students sit down together to view their efforts and discuss the ideas that the activity has inspired.
Yeah, look at my draw, Barney. Well done, everybody. That was so much harder than I thought it would be, and you coped with that really, really easily. It's the first time I've tried doing that with a class. You did really, really well. So this is going to be really embarrassing for Fiona, but we're going to have a very quick look at some of the things that you shot. And I'd like this group, perhaps, if you could talk me through why you changed bits, why you redid a scene, and why you think something was particularly effective. Okay, so if you're ready, I know you shot this a couple of times. If everyone would like to have a look.
It was the owl.
That's it, this is one part.
Right, was that zoom in deliberate, Cameron?
Yeah.
Why did you zoom in on her then?
Get to see the guards, what it was like on the floor.
Okay.
It was lying.
Why did you decide to include the guards there? Because they weren't in. They're not necessarily.
It has to be said that the thoughts that have emerged are very interesting indeed, and in much greater depth than might have been achieved by just reading the text. These students have actually brought Macbeth to life in a startlingly contemporary fashion, and the coursework that they subsequently enter for their exams will be of a much higher standard as a result.
How do you think
They've
they
all
were best
experienced for themselves the feelings and emotions of the play's two main characters in a scene that is undoubtedly a dramatic turning point in the action.
Good. Why else might? But she's not afraid because she's drugged the guards, is she? Why is she really scared?
Whatever level you're at in your Shakespeare studies, trying to share discussion time with other students. It'll help you develop new ideas that otherwise you might have missed. Some people find it really helpful to use a mind map, jotting down all their thoughts as they crop up. This one has been drawn to question whether or not Lady Macbeth is in fact the true villain of the play. And once you've done this, you can pull all your ideas together and put them in order. Work out which quotations you want to use and logically sequence your evidence to back up your argument. Remember in any written piece of work to set out your key points in the introduction. Work through your ideas over the bulk of your writing in the main section, and always leave enough time to really pull everything together with a sharp, well-constructed conclusion. Think of it as a brief, informative beginning, a substantial, corroborated middle, and a tight, concise end. Don't waffle on. It's possible to apply these guidelines to any of Shakespeare's plays. And after watching the programme this far, you should have plenty of interesting thoughts to bring to your work. However, whatever topic you might be tackling, make sure you remember the following points.
Right. How do you think using a low angle helps convey that sense?
Firstly, work on characterisation. We've talked a great deal about this, and as Shakespeare was particularly brilliant at creating diverse and fascinating characters, there'll be no shortage of material. Secondly, consider plot and structure. Question how Shakespeare actually organises his play, and make sure that you clearly understand the order in which events take place. Don't overlook the setting and atmosphere of a play. Scotland's rugged landscape and the thunderstorm when the three witches first appear in Macbeth really conjure up the turbulent story that's about to take place. Watch out for changes of scene and mood variations in the characters, as the two are often directly related. Shakespeare's style of writing and use of language is fascinating, and it's worth familiarising yourself with his favourite word plays. Metaphors, similes, personification and alliteration are well used throughout his works, so have as many examples of each as you can remember to hand. Consider the viewpoint that each Shakespeare play is told from. Whose perspective is the story from, and what effect does that have on the audience? Lastly, remember how this programme opened, with Shakespeare's own fascinating story. Think about what might have influenced him as an author in his own life, and you can always refer to historical events that Shakespeare would have been aware of to set his work in context. With all that said, however, do try to keep your personal response and interpretation of Shakespeare's plays fresh and therefore interesting. Text commentaries and programmes like this can be very helpful to focus on any given play. But do remember that examiners will quickly spot if you've simply regurgitated what can be found in print. Think for yourself and add a little originality. The students working on Macbeth certainly came up with some very original ideas, and not only will this assist you in getting better marks in any exam, it might also help you to appreciate and enjoy Shakespeare all the more.
Ben, what does that...
It might seem hard to believe on occasion, when you're studying a set text, that Shakespeare actually wrote plays for people to enjoy, purely for entertainment, and you can be pretty sure there were never any test questions at the end of performances at the Globe in his day. In fact, no one would be more surprised than Shakespeare to see 21st century students delving into the whys and wherefores of his scribblings some 400 years after he first took up his quill and parchment.
And making the audience think that they're part of it, and what else?
What does it say about their relationship, Ben?
Oh yeah, well, she's trying to like touch him up. Like,
Ooh, that's interesting.
And with that
Sam.
poignant
That's a
thought,
really interesting
our
idea.
programme draws to a close. Hopefully, if you started out a detester of Shakespeare, you'll now be able to look upon him in a more favourable light. And if not, well, at least you'll be able to put forward a coherent argument for banishing the complete works of Shakespeare off the face of the earth. Just remember, you are entitled to your opinion, whatever it might be. And whether for your own enjoyment or exam success, stick to what you believe and back up your ideas with research and quotations from the text.
Talk of these sad things. Some should be pardoned and some should be punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo.
It is, however, only right and proper that Shakespeare should have the last word on this. And in Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3, Polonius, a bit of an old busybody, is advising his departing son on life, the universe, and absolutely everything. Amongst all of this long-winded pontificating, Shakespeare gives Polonius some wise words to utter, and the sentiment is well worth remembering. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. And one man his tongue plays nippers, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like a snail unwillingly to school.